Hi, my name is Valerie Varan. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I've been in practice since 2006, where the universe sent me all kinds of fellow experiencers of spiritual and multidimensional consciousness. Now, I turned in the 80s to quantum physics to understand my own experiences, and I've become quite the advocate for a quantum psychology. Today, I have with me Lynn Russell, who's also a researcher, and she also turned to quantum physics to understand some of her experiences. Let me read you a little bit more about Lynn's background. So, Lynn has been a spiritual seeker all her life. In her mid teens, she researched the major world religions and spiritual philosophies in search of truth, and wherever that might lead her. She also turned to quantum physics to understand her own experiences. And for over 30 years, she worked as a family counselor. After retiring, became involved with the research of Dr. Jeffrey Long, a medical doctor. And that was through his near-death experiences research foundation that we often refer to as NDErs. After researching 2,500 cases of near-death experiences, Lynn was so delighted by what she learned that she wrote the book, The Wonder of You, What Near-Death Experience Tells You About Yourself. And through this research, Lynn discovered answers to the more profound questions humans have asked since our ancestors lived in caves. Now she has written another book that we will be talking about today, called Beyond NDEs, the next step in near-death experience research. And it's about the spiritual experience, the spiritual messages, rather, that are coming back from those who have been there. She's also looking forward to launching a spiritual tween book called Whirlpool. So, Lynn, welcome. I'm so delighted to be able to have us have this conversation. So, can you share first a little bit about how you came to write this book?
Yes, I've been a researcher, or not a researcher, a seeker of spiritual truth all my life, from my childhood. And so I finally, I was getting some answers with the near-death experience after I had done quite a few, like a few hundred. Then I was starting to see these hidden messages. And then that's when I started to think, well, I had no intentions of writing a book, but I was so thrilled. I wanted to share it with everybody. And so that was my first book, The Wonder of You. And but there was still more information, and especially in conjunction with quantum physics. And so that's when I wrote Beyond NDEs.
Yeah, oh, wonderful. So, you and I have actually been working, both of us, of course, as professional counselors, and we're definitely aware of the harm that mainstream psychology can have on experiencers. Now, in the book, you mentioned that doctors' reactions to NDEs are changing, that they're listening more, becoming more open, which of course thrilled me. But can you elaborate on that, the difference that you see?
Yeah. Um, 10 years ago, doctors didn't want to talk about their death experience, and they were really almost embarrassed or apologetic about having death experiences. And some of them just denied that was not a death experience, that was, or a near death experience. They just didn't want to accept that. But since Eben Alexander opened the doors, and he showed that it was okay to talk about it and that you didn't lose your position, because that was a big fear of most people. He may still have difficulty with the odd individual, but most of the time, and the other thing is that recently, IANDS, IANDS, which is international, oh geez,
Oh, yes, the International Association for Near-Death Experiences. Yes.
yeah. And so they had a webinar specifically for doctors who had had death experience. And that wouldn't have happened 10 years ago either. And another thing is that more and more doctors are writing books about either their experience or their research. And I went to Google to just check and see, and there is a huge list of doctors that have written books on near-death experience or about it in some way or another. So that is wonderful. The door is opening. However, it's not wide enough. There are still a lot of doctors that are just never going to accept it, and that's okay. That's where they're coming from.
And that is so true. So basically, you've been able to see how all these doctors are writing more books now, thank goodness, and that even Alexander kind of opened that door. Have you heard from experiencers themselves in any way, or someone like through personal contact, people saying, hey, I was able to say this to my doctor, I was able to say this to my mental health practitioner, I found more. Were you able to actually even find it at that level?
Yes, yes. Quite a few people said that they, during the death experience, and they could hear the thoughts of the people around them and know what was going on and see the operation and know exactly what was happening there. And so afterward, after the operation was finished and the doctor came to have a visit, they were able to tell the doctor what they were thinking about or what. And another thing, they would know, for example, that a doctor was going through a divorce, or a nurse was worried about one of her children. Those kind of things came out afterwards. And so that was exciting. And doctors reacted differently. Some doctors got frightened and just left the room and didn't come back. Other ones asked questions and kept coming back and asking more questions. It's individual.
So at least we do have those ones that came back and actually asked more questions. Well, that is basically great news. Now, you discussed the universal and the common elements that are emerging from this kind of research. And we hear of different things like the oneness, how everything is God and God is everything, how God is the vibration of love, and this vibration of love creates light in the body of light. So it sounds like love is the essence, the consciousness at the core of the body in creation, which is made of light. And of course, for me, that's all fascinating because those light and love, and, when you're trying to think quantum physics, you're trying to, understand what are these NDErs bringing back in terms of their concepts of this. So maybe let's maybe just differentiate three things. So when we think of what most people call God, and you think of in your experience with these researchers, how do most of them describe this concept of God?
Well, most of them talk about the light that they've seen as being God. That for them is God. And but describing, I don't know that huge amounts of love, like overwhelming amount of love, which we've heard repeatedly from other experiences, people. But one of the things that I'm aware of is that we talk about God being love, but I think that love is an essence of God. It's the being of God. And so all creation is also created from that love power. And so that's how I see God, and others will come out with the same kind of thing. And they talk about how creation happens and just wonderful experiences. It's so exciting.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I love that because, for instance, in spiritual texts, when you hear as above, so below, when we think of God as the essence of love, but the body being a body of light, and visibly what we see is the light, but how it comes together, it's just so beautiful to think that that's the image that we're actually really made of, right? So,
Yeah, that's exactly.
now I know experiencers also talk about being able to be that speck, being one with God, but more of the speck. So when you think of, so many people use the word soul, based on what you've seen, what is the soul compared to God, or compared to, let's say, human ego mind?
Okay. That's a little bit difficult, but I can answer it. It's just take me a minute. I see the soul as connection to God. Well, I don't think we've ever left the source. At this exact moment, we are still with source. But the problem is that we've got amnesia and we don't know about it. So that's important. And I think that is our connection. I see us as perpetually connected, and that would be my soul. And
So it sounds like the soul being who we really are. And when we
yes,
are connected, it is the soul that is always connected. And I know, for instance, recently, IANS, like we said, the International Near-Death Studies Group, they came out with a symposium and they were just talking about the brain as a filter. So like you said, it seems that the brain constantly is filtering out the greater consciousness and our God self. But the real essence is the soul, I'm hearing, right? So
yeah,
that's
yeah.
beautiful.
The soul
And
is connection.
is connection. That is our connection. That's beautiful. And I think somewhere in your book, at least one of the passages, one of your experiencers kept describing the consciousness that they experienced even within every cell. Do you mind speaking to that?
Yes, actually, everything I talk about comes from the position of oneness, because I'm very, very steeped into knowing that we are God. We are source. We are the creative energy. And so I have a star, a 5-star um, um, I don't know, explanation, I guess, for quantum connection to consciousness, and that is that the quantum particles are aware of consciousness. If there's a consciousness in the room, like another person, a thinking person in the room, the results are different than if no one is there. Another thing is that what Ions is talking about with that seminar, and that was that we get I don't want to say a signal, that would be the word, a signal within the brain seconds before we even know what we're going to be reacting to. And where's that coming from? I believe that is our connection, the soul connection. We also know that our consciousness is connected to the atmosphere of the world. And that's a fabulous experiment that was done with Dr. Roger Nelson. And so those kind of things bring together. And the bottom line is consciousness, that thought, that awareness. And so what I call God is positive energy force or the source, because it is the universal consciousness. That is all that, and that's all that exists. There is nothing else. There is only universal consciousness that exists. And it expresses in many, many different ways. And we happen to be a part of that expression. But this expression is an illusion. And
I
that's hard.
love that.
Yeah.
Well, and even kind of adding to what you just said, right? We do know that that the quantum realm is kind of beyond a space-time realm. And so it makes sense to you and I who love going down the quantum physics rabbit hole, why we can receive information about 3 seconds before, let's say, the target is even shown. So like you said, our consciousness is already connected, and it's only the illusion of space-time, right? This is the illusion of
Exactly.
space-time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, do you I know in a download I had one time in 6th grade, it seemed pretty adamant. It was this spiritual download I got because I was contemplating atoms. I had just learned about atoms in school that day. And I was on my bed contemplating, and I kept wondering, well, how is that atom, you know, that's part of the chair know that it's part of the chair, but this little round thing in space right next to it know that it's part of me instead of the chair. And that's about when the spiritual download came in. And it basically made me feel that even subatomic particles are conscious in their own way, of course, not the same as a human consciousness.
Yeah.
And so for you, that feels true as well?
Oh, yes. Quantum particles are are the source is consciousness. I mean, it's the same base. Everything is source, and or the you know, and so yeah, every cell is alive in our body. It's an individual life. And I love that question, by the way. That's a beautiful question. And so everything is alive and vibrant. And that's within your body. And so we really should acknowledge that. We should be aware of how magnificent our bodies are, because we have billions of cells within our body doing exactly what they're meant to do. And they're doing it in conjunction with everybody else and their life forms. Each one of them is a separate life form. That's amazing.
I love that. And you know who else had a similar download about what we're talking about was the astronaut Edgar Mitchell. He came back with a very similar download about everything being alive. And I know before he passed, he had put out his theory, and it was a quantum holographic type of theory. And I think we'll be talking about that a little bit later. But it's fascinating, when even these kind of scientists are saying what we're saying, and that is, yes, we agree that each particle is alive in a certain way, is conscious in a certain way. And therefore, doesn't it make sense that it responds to the consciousness in the room, as you put it?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
In quantum physics, right? They have the observer effect. When they're taking measurements, it's responding to the physicists or whoever's doing the measuring, it's responding to their consciousness. So I love that. Love that. So let me ask you, how does quantum physics help you as a believer in a spiritual realm? Like, some people might say, well, what does quantum physics have to do with anything? But in my experience, for people who have had experiences, quantum physics very much helps. And I would just love to hear how it helps you as an experiencer.
Oh, well, primarily what I just talked about. When I was curious about science about 50 years ago, and I didn't know anything about quantum physics at that point, but I saw my first galaxy on the television, and I was blown away by this beauty, that this magnificent thing was out in the universe. And so that got me very interested, and I wanted to know more and more and more. And so that began it. And so I started off with cosmology. But then when quantum physics came along, I was very curious about how the original, my original connection with quantum physics was when they were trying to put gravity together with the quantum physics, because it wouldn't match. And so I was sort of got a little bit involved in what were they going to do? How would they figure this out? And so on. And there's been several very, very valid explanations, and we'll see what happens with that. But they still haven't figured it out, or at least agreed. That's a better way of saying it.
That's a great way of saying it. Like you said, many people
they
still
love to fight. They love to argue with one another.
They do, right? Many quantum theories of gravity. As you said that, it reminds me that one of the leading consciousness theories out there is called orchestrated objective reduction, and it's put out by Stuart Hameroff, who's an anesthesiologist, and Roger Penrose, the physicist. And they actually have, according to Roger Penrose, because he feels quantum mechanics is incomplete, he's adding relativity to it. And he does give a role for gravity, by the way, in collapsing the wave function and leading to a conscious moment. So it's kind of fascinating about that. Oh, thanks. Yeah, I love hearing what people enjoy about the quantum physics part.
And excuse me, what I talked about with those points of well, those were the ones that when I saw them and it went click in my brain, I was just, that's it. And so the big ahas.
Oh, I'd like to hear more about that when you were talking about the dots.
Well, when I was talking about the particles having, consciousness of some sort that we don't quite understand, or about the message coming into the brain early, and those researches that I just mentioned, those just thrilled me, absolutely thrilled me, because to me, they were talking about spiritual and connecting.
Amen.
Yeah.
Isn't that true? I love that. So actually, that takes me into the next question I was eager to ask you, because it's interesting how science pretty much considers energy a physical thing. And I think, Einstein had said, yes, what we can do is see that there's energy behind all matter. And yet, interesting for me as an experiencer, it's kind of funny that they don't see energy apart from matter. And yet, experiencers often receive information like, oh, there's cosmic energy, there's spiritual energy, as well as physical energy. So I was just curious what your thoughts are about that.
Well, I actually think that any energy is illusion, because the only thing that actually exists is soul, is the source. That's the only consciousness and the only energy. So all other energies come from that source, and that is created through illusion and consciousness and thought.
Now, if I'm hearing you correctly, then basically there's a cosmic energy, and what physicists are looking at as physical energy is really just kind of like a transduced form of cosmic energy.
Yes, and the cosmic energy for me is consciousness.
I love that.
And the consciousness of source.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. So when you think of, often experiencers will talk about multiple dimensions, or not necessarily in your book, but I've seen, in other places where they're experiencing parallel realities, or basically the word multidimensionality comes up a lot, or multiverse comes up a lot. I was wondering what your thoughts are about that. How do we describe these various realms that are not, might include, but are not the same as our physical realm?
I think it's fun. I really do. I think that it stems from string theory. And because there are 11 dimensions within string theory, so our imaginations take us on trips, and how would that express itself? How would that show? And so I think that that's part of the multiverse. I mean, I believe that there is a multiverse, because I think that the source is way, way, way more than just this universe. I think, that it just wouldn't stop. And so I do think that there is multiverse, but I do think that because it comes from source, it's another aspect of illusion. I just want to add to that. I talk about source a lot and the oneness of source, But I need to stress that we are source. We are the creative ones. We are the ones creating these multiverses and all the illusions that we see. We're the creators of that, and we need to acknowledge that very much.
Love that. Now, I think you have also referenced David Bohm and the way he looked at the universe as a hologram and as a projection, essentially, of a deeper order. I'm going to kind of refer to some things that I saw in your book that experiencers said. They've said the world is a hologram created by the collective consciousness for the sake of growth and evolution, that cosmic energy, which is also us, which is what you just said, has been condensed into creations of 3D images or substances. They've said that the world is a creation of love energy, of thought, and that this love is creative and collective consciousness itself. So based on all of these, like, how do you see a reality? How do you use the word hologram or holographic?
Oh, I'm 100% believe that there is, that everything. There have been so many studies, quantum physics studies and others, that show that the universe is actually two-dimensional, and that this whole universe is holographic. And I think that's just the way that it was, that the source else put things together. It's just a tool. It's like time and space are tools, and so holographic is another tool of how we can put this together and have a full experience. The other thing is that there's a fellow named S. James Gates. And I love him. He's a physicist, and he's what I like about him is he's very gentle and soft, and I like gentle people. Anyway, he has found at the base of string theory, he has found a computer program. And that is like, wow. Yeah, well, that can't tell you a lot. I know that he has found this, and I would suggest people look it up. But I think the fact that there's a program, I'd like other people to look and see so that we have a peer review on that. But I think the fact that there would be a program sort of adds to the holographic theory and the theory that this is illusion.
Yeah.
And so we really need to pay attention to that illusion because we're creating it.
Well, and when we think of the message of God is light, and that maybe our body is made of light, and scientifically we know our body is made of photons and light of light, and what is a hologram but a projection of light? So some might argue that the universe isn't holographic because the originating source in a hologram is static. But I think maybe similarly to you, I think they're looking at that maybe in a limited way, rather than if we expand our definition and consider that source really is the one starting the whole process.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so we might have to have an expanded view of the word hologram, but when we see light within light within light within light in multi dimensions of light,
Yes,
no wonder
exactly.
we all keep using the phrase hologram.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's so exciting. I just get excited about learning all of this kind of thing and growing. And our job is, let me just explain how I see this. Imagine source being in nothingness, and imagine this enormous being of intelligence and love and and consciousness that it's in nothingness. That it couldn't exist that way. It would not exist. It has to create. And so it creates because it must for itself and for its and for the world. And so we are the creators. We create because we must. And it shows even in our everyday life here, we're always creating. I mean, we're great creators.